I am a senior consultant. I have worked with this chatbot technology, specifically the BMC chatbot technology, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The agenda for our webinar today is to go through and understand what a chatbot is. Why should I care? What are some real world use cases that can be applied? What's involved in the chatbot? How do we set it up? And where can I go to learn some more? So first and foremost, what is a chatbot? At its core, it's a pretty simple thing, really. It's functionally a computer program that's designed to conduct a conversation, which in and of itself can be relatively simplistic, or it can get quite advanced when you start to introduce capabilities such as natural language processing, the ability to understand syntax, sentence structure, synonyms, misspellings, when you actually can understand what somebody means as opposed to what they say. That definitely gives the chatbot some legs. And then you couple that with things like artificial intelligence, the ability to infer, the ability to learn through machine learning algorithms over time, just improve the intelligence of the chatbot as it matures. Not required, but what I think is a really ideal addition to a chatbot technology is the ability to interact with it from multiple angles. We call it multi-channel interface. So not just a traditional web browser, but opening that up to things like collaboration tools that are employed by our organizations today, Slack, Skype, Jabber, all the instant messaging type of collaboration tools, as well as things like through SMS text messaging. The younger generation, especially millennials, it's shown that their preferred interaction medium is through text and instant messaging type of platforms. So making those additional interfaces available to interact with your conversational chatbot, again, utilizing natural language processing, is really a key. Now, where this really takes off in terms of the ability to help organizations, it's one thing to understand what somebody wants, but lastly, to be able to do something about it, to trigger the fulfillment activity, to automate that fulfillment activity. Now you're seeing efficiencies abound. So ideally, we've got a computer program conducting the conversation naturally, but coupled with that natural language processing on the front end, the ability to figure out what you want, any means of interacting with it that we can make available, and then the ability to fulfill it on the back end is what makes a powerful chatbot. Why should I care? Chatbot, it's cool, it's slick, it's shiny and new. There's a lot of hype about it. It's gotten some bad press of late. If you harken back to a couple of years ago, where we've got bots being used for malicious purposes, as Dick indicated earlier. So not all the press has been good, but there's a lot more positives than that will surely outweigh the negatives. First and foremost is this. 60 billion in productivity improvements estimated for just U.S. enterprises that leverage this type of technology. $60 billion is, I ran a quick comparison, 3 times the gross domestic product of the entire country of Portugal. And that's just now. That's with only relatively small percentage of adoption. By 2020, however, over 50% of medium and large enterprises will have adopted this technology, will have deployed some form or fashion of these product chatbots, Gartner estimates. And what does that mean? So it means that right now, a lot of organizations are looking to get their chatbots deployed so that they can have a competitive advantage in their relevant market spaces. It also means that by 2020, if you haven't already deployed your chatbot, chances are you will no longer be looking at a chatbot to innovate in your respective areas. You'll simply be looking at chatbots in order to keep up with those other organizations that have already gone down this path. So this is, it is, as Dick mentioned, the Gartner hype cycle. It is on the uptake. I don't expect that trough of disillusionment to happen anytime soon when people start to realize the tangible benefits, the productivity improvements, the real-world cost savings that they enjoy as a result. So how can we use this to our advantage? I tell people that these use cases are really limited by your imagination, as it turns out. And I'll go through some examples here. And the first couple are ones that we've actually implemented for customers. We had a university in the Northeast that wanted to facilitate student onboarding as students return to campus in the fall. What can they do to expedite that process? Every student comes in with essentially the same core set of questions that they all end up calling their service desk to respond. And they get inundated, as you can imagine, in the first couple weeks of class. So anything they could do to offload that, especially during that especially peak volume time, they were very interested. So one of the common requests is everyone comes into school these days with their Xbox in hand, their Apple TVs, their Roku players, all of these devices that they want to plug into the secure university network. One of the things we did was actually enable, through Chatbot, the registration of those devices so that it could plug into the university's secure wireless network automatically. They don't just add anything, it's not an open access guest network. It needs to be a student. They have to have a valid device. They have to have a valid reason. So there's a bunch of information that's required in order to register these devices, but without any human intervention whatsoever, they're able to go through that process and get their devices online, onboarded, by themselves without needing to call the service desk for assistance. Another one was just in the student setup. So as students return to class, they get issued or come to class for the first time, they get issued an email address for the university. They get set up in their Active Directory. They get access to the various Blackboard systems, the learning management systems, so on and so forth. All of that is provisioned as a result of them actually showing up for the first day of class. But the ability to have them self-register and then get provisioned across the university, it was all facilitated through the Chatbot application. Some basic knowledge lookup. How do I type questions? And there's a few of those. It was initially rolled out to be relatively strict in terms of what it would actually provide information for. But if you have a knowledge base, if you're utilizing knowledge management today, you can think of being able to open that up into a chatbot scenario. So whatever questions people are asking your service desk, if you have canned knowledge content that you can provide, it can be provided through a chatbot type of interface. And then moving off of that example into some more just classic real-world examples of how other organizations are using this, not just from a pure IT perspective, but from a business perspective, for things like supply chain management, the ability to have additional vendor interfaces with organizations to reorder parts and supplies when they get low, as an example. One interesting application I saw a few months back, there's a traffic ticket appeals website, completely free to the public, that will take your information, understand why you don't think you deserved that ticket, for example, go through and fill out all of the necessary legal documents required, put the appropriate verbiage and wording in that you would want to express, and even wordsmiths it for you so that it doesn't have to be your language. It could be more of a formal language, formalized language. And submit it to the court. And as of last year, I think there were over 375,000 parking tickets that were disputed using this process, and ended up saving consumers or the people who received these citations over $9.3 million. And that's within less than a couple of years time span of being in existence. So it's real money being saved by real people with a real world application. And I think the gentleman that created this website was 18 at the time. So just a pretty decent example of how the younger folks are going to really take to this. In the financial industry, such as mortgage brokering, the ability to have interfaces that are readily available. You don't have to wait on a banking official. So to go through and actually process claims or get approvals for mortgages and expedite the overall approval process for bank loans is pretty significant. So that's a competitive advantage for a lot of mortgage brokerages when they know that they can reduce the time to close by whatever that percentage is. Another classic example, healthcare, and not so much on the back end IT side, but again in direct frontline with patient care. the ability of charge nurses to more efficiently go through and order prescriptions or medications or test medications against contraindications, other medications that the patient may already be using, the ability to order lab results or um, X-rays, all of that type of stuff that can be done just through verbal indication or really quickly using a chatbot as opposed to the forms and forms and forms that they generally have to fill out and find themselves in front of a computer the majority of time doing so. And then lastly, we have a simple example of a new SharePoint folder request. And this is another real world example that we actually created to go out to interface actually with SharePoint Online as a service. So I'm going to transition real quickly into that and just refresh my browser to make sure I haven't timed out in the interim here. And then we'll show that example. So I'm bringing up the chatbot now. It knows my name. I've previously logged in. And I'm going to say, I need a new SharePoint folder. And it's going to take that and say, okay, would you like me to create a folder? Confirming that, in fact, that is my intent. Yes. They can help with that. Enter the name. How long do I need it? Say 2 years. Now what it's doing is actually creating a service request on the back end. Tells me that the request was successfully submitted, that I will be granted access to that folder once it's been successfully provisioned and receive an email with those access instructions. And then it says, what else can I do for you? So I want to see the status of my tickets. Oops. Presents me with the status of my tickets. I see my SharePoint folder. I can go look at those details. I see that it's closed because this is all automated on the back end. It created the request. It went out to SharePoint Online, actually provisioned the folder under my name, and shows me that, in fact, it's been completed. Anything else I can help you with? Short and sweet. So what components are involved with what we just saw? So what we looked at was the actual BMC chatbot. There's other chatbots that are out there, but the one that I'm most familiar with, the one I've actually worked with multiple times now, is the BMC chatbot. And it's comprised of a few different technologies, one of which is the IBM Watson conversation service. That is the actual, what we classically consider the chatbot itself. And IBM Watson is also brings to the table the natural language processing, the NLP, as well as the artificial intelligence components. And it's a very powerful conversation service. The other component that productizes us for BMC is essentially their digital workplace advanced solution. And that's a holistic solution involving a few different aspects, one being the innovation suite, and we'll look a little bit more at that. The chatbot application itself that's been developed to work with the IBM Conversation Service, a service broker and integration service for some of the custom elements to tie into our service desk for our service request management functions, and integration service for those third-party integrations, such as with HP Aruba ClearPass that we saw when I gave the use case around device registration for students at the campus. Another component are what we call those connectors. So with the BMC chatbot solution, there are canned connectors that BMC supplies into some common online tools, some cloud services such as Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and some others, as well as into some of their own products such as BMC Remedy ITSM. And then you can develop custom connectors. And I already mentioned the example of HP Aruba ClearPass that we used to interface with that solution so that we could provide the device information, the student registration information, so that it could authenticate them and allow them to access their wireless network with those devices. And then a couple optional components. So the multi-channel interface is not required. You can use the web-based version that we just saw a moment ago. But we can also configure additional interface options. And then lastly, an IT service management tool on the back end. So theoretically, the chatbot can operate autonomously, as well as if you just wanted to have connectors into other other services, that could work as well. But a lot of organizations, especially for internal use, will want to interface with some sort of IT service management application, which is important because we don't want this to be a workaround or circumvent our IT infrastructure library, our ITIL best practices, procedures, maybe all of the compliances the compliance that we've built into our processes to make sure that we're following suit and able to meet regulatory guidelines, et cetera, as well as, audits. So we want to make sure that we're still able to file the artifacts, create the tickets, work them through this life cycle, make sure that we've got that auditability on the back end. So it's a common tie-in as well. So how does it work? Starts off with me as a user using one of my interface channels, talking to Digital Workplace Advanced. In this specific case, it's the Innovation Suite component under the recently branded BMC Helix solution. So you'll hear BMC Helix if you go to their website to look for this type of technology. Once Digital Workplace gets its hands on it, the Innovation Suite processes it and then sends it off to the conversation service, again, hosted by IBM Watson. So it makes the request in turn to IBM Watson, who processes it. Figures out, again, using its NLP, using AI, it's going to say, okay, here's what they mean. And it's going to reply with a response back into the Innovation Suite. Now from there, it's either going to come back to the user for additional input if it needs more questions, or if it's decided that there's some action to take, it's going to go through and fulfill that activity. So the fulfillment actions can be multiple things, right? We've got our ITSM, maybe we want to create a ticket. We've got things like register this device with HP Aruba ClearPass. Maybe we're going out to that SharePoint folder, or creating that SharePoint folder by going out to SharePoint Online to do so. And then others, right? So it's any of the canned integrations that BMC supplies, but any of the custom connectors that we might want to develop to interface with cloud services, our own back office applications, et cetera. And then lastly, once it's fulfilled, the request gets confirmed, the fulfillment occurs, the status is communicated back to Innovation Suite, which lastly communicates that information back to the user. So that's sort of the life cycle of this type of request and how it flows. Next, how do I actually set this up? So I'll go pretty briefly and at a relatively high level. I don't want to get too into the weeds here. But first, we need an account with IBM, first and foremost. And BMC will actually do this on your behalf if you don't want to have to go out to IBM and do this yourself. However, it is pretty simple in terms of getting started because you can get a free account from IBM to at least get going and get started here. And then you can always convert to a paid account if, in fact, you need to. Next, we actually create the conversation workspace. So once we have an account with IBM, we want to create our chatbot, and they call them conversation workspaces. When we have that, the third thing we're going to do is actually start to develop within that Watson tool. It's called the Watson Assistant. And you create intents, entities, and dialogues. An intent is essentially a list of the things that you want a user to be able to request, sort of the things that they're intending to do. Entities are effectively synonyms for objects. So you've got devices. Well, what's a device? It could be an appliance. It could be a router. It could be a piece of equipment. It could be desktops, laptops, so on and so forth. And you can sort of categorize those by different types of things, and that's just used to figure out maybe what type of device you want to take some sort of action on. And then lastly, the dialogues. This is the actual conversation. This is the node pairs, the if, then, else type of logic all goes into the development of the dialogue itself. So IBM provides many, many, many online tutorials how to get started here, starting from very, very basic to pretty advanced. So I'm not going to go into those, but the nice part about it is you can get up and running essentially self-paced. So using your own internet access, you can train yourself and get quite far along, as it turns out. Now, when you actually purchase the BMC chatbot, it comes with a pre-built conversation that you can use. So it comes with one of these IBM Watson conversations that you can load and build on, or you can essentially start from scratch if you prefer. So once we've got our conversation service, we need to plug it in to our innovation suite. And that's done in the innovation suite administration. It's relatively straightforward. We basically tell it what conversation service using a username password pair that is provided by IBM, and we configure it, and that's how it knows to use that particular IBM instance that's dedicated to us. And then we need to build the processes. So it's great that we've got the chatbot on the front end, but what do we want to do with that? So the Innovation Suite, as part of the Digital Workplace Advanced, provides a process designer. And we can do multiple things, but in this case, maybe we're just getting a list of user assets that are assigned to a particular individual. But this is where we can drag and drop our process design elements and then hook into our custom connectors that we've developed as well, or utilize the ones provided out of the box. The next step, actually, let me mention that there is a lot more information available regarding the process designer online from BMC. The next step is to figure out the triggers. At what point in the dialogue do we want to take that action? So once we've got our processes defined, once we know the actions that are going to occur, how do we hook that back into the front end? How do we let Watson know that, oh, by the way, here's the information you need to provide the fulfillment of that particular request? And that's done what I call the secret sauce. This is where it all sort of comes together. You've got the dialogue itself that you can edit at this level, where you define the actions it's going to take, the inputs that it's going to receive, the outputs that it's going to provide back to the conversation service once the request has been made. Now, this is all done in what's known as JSON, JavaScript Object Notation Model, and it's really the behind-the-scenes stuff of how this data is interchanged. The nice part about JSON is it's pretty well accepted as a standard anymore for inter-application data exchange. It's gained a lot of favor of late, and I foresee that this will continue. The additional advantage of this is if you have your JSON developed for, say, the IBM conversation service, it won't be very difficult to modify that JSON to apply to some other conversation service. So once we've got that hooked in, we've got a couple of our optional steps, such as the interaction channels. So here we see that we've got Innovation Suite, and we've got 3 different things that we can connect out of the box, and that's Skype for Business, Slack, another very popular instant messaging tool, and then Twilio. And if you're not familiar with Twilio, Twilio provides an SMS interface. So you can text message a phone number that you get assigned from Twilio, and that in turn will interact with the chatbot as though they were on a web browser interacting with their chatbot. With the SMS, there are some other limitations. Depending on the phone, it may not show the graphics, etc. But there's workarounds for that in terms of at least getting some form of textual display out to end users through SMS. One of the other kind of slick things with the Twilio is that when you get a survey, you can respond with emoticons. So you can say smiley face, sad face. Again, more for the millennial crowd perhaps, but that being said, it's really where these things are going. So having the chatbot's great, but the ability to front end it with things like Amazon Alexa or Google Home or all those other voice services will be big. And it's only a matter of time. BMC is actively working to build this out to allow as many channels as possible. So it will improve over time as well. And then lastly, if we want to hook into our ITSM service catalog, there's a few different things we need to figure out, and that's the digital workplace configuration. We want to map our services that we want to make exposed through the chatbot. We have to perform a mapping. And then lastly, we would configure the integration service, which is a separate aspect of digital workplace, if we want to have our own custom connectors. Those custom connectors are developed in the integration service, and sort of all of the information for that lies in another cloud service that we need to point it to. So to summarize what we've seen, what is a chatbot? As we mentioned, it's a computer program conducting a conversation, but really to harness the power of it, we need to have some sort of natural language processing. In the past, we've had automated chatbots, but they're kind of clunky, kind of hard to use. If you don't use the right verbiage, you misspell a word, it can't figure out what you mean. NLP takes that away. NLP understands what you mean as opposed to what you say, and it's pretty important, the distinction. The artificial intelligence aspect, the ability to learn, apply machine learning, understand, the fact that you've got certain names that something may go by within a given organization, the ability of the machine to learn that type of stuff, it's pretty important as well. And where it really, I think, takes off is in the RPA tie-in. So the ability to automate the fulfillment actions on the back end. So now you've got a natural language conversation on the front end, coupled with automation on the back end to fulfill those requests. That's where the true power of this lies. Why should we care? As we mentioned, there are significant opportunities for operational improvements and to reduce costs. It's only going to improve. So right now, with limited deployments, you've got a lot of organizations recognizing some significant real-world benefits, and that's just on a limited scope. The advice is always to kind of start small, go with the top 2-3 use cases that you have, things that you really think you can make an impact, and then refine from there. What are the use cases? Again, I think you're limited by your imagination, quite frankly. Tell me what your challenges are, and we'll figure out what those use cases could be to solve those challenges. They're wide and varied, from very specific IT types of use cases to again, real-world problems around traffic tickets, or I saw another application being worked on by the same gentleman, actually, who is going to make filing for refugee status available to all people online. I mean, so really from narrow back office type of solutions to world-changing type of solutions, it's pretty vast. What components are involved? Again, for BMC chatbot, minimally you need Digital Workplace Advanced and the IBM Watson Conversation Service. But I think that you'll probably want to explore the components of ITSM as a back-end request fulfillment process, and making sure you're tracking all of this activity, as well as the additional interfaces that you can have: Skype, Slack, Twilio, extending the reach of this to the mediums that your employees want to use and do use. And then how do I set it up? We create the conversation using IBM Watson's Assistant. We configure Digital Workplace Advanced. We develop those workflows and any additional connectors as may be needed. And then lastly, how can I learn more? Just give us a call, and we'll be happy to help.
Or you could use a chatbot if you had one, right? Just have that, ask a question to the chatbot, and I'm sure they would respond. So, Ezra, excellent job. Now would be a good time to ask a question. There's a Q&A box if you wanted to put a question in there. Now we'll get to it. There's a couple that have come in, and one of the questions here says, is there a voice option? So I guess if somebody has a phone and wants to call the service desk, and let's say that nobody's at home, can they talk to a chatbot over the phone? Does that work yet, or do you have to have, like you said, the Twilio, or what were some of the other options? Twilio, HTML obviously would work, right?
Right, and
yeah.
Skype,
Slack,
Slack,
yep. Yeah.
So the short answer is the BMC chatbot does not have any direct tie-ins to those additional voice services as front-end channels. However, if you look at IBM Watson's Conversation Service, they do have third-party solutions that have already been shown to work with things like Amazon Alexa. So voice activation sitting in front of the chatbot is certainly possible. When you start talking more of your IVR type systems, so you have a line that you're calling in that you want to be able to speak with and then have that translated. Right now, I haven't seen any specific examples of those telco vendors providing that type of plug-in to a chatbot capability, but I imagine it's only a matter of time.
I'm just curious, what kind of questions can you ask? Are you only able to? I guess when you set this up, you you're limited to maybe IT types of questions. But what if, let's say, you were in a hospital, or maybe even a law firm, and you had specific, uh, subject matter type questions, maybe related to a hospital or related to a law firm, something like that you wanted answered. Could you use the same tool, IBM Watson, or would you need to set up a separate instance?
Yeah. No, you can absolutely use the same tool. And in fact, there's a significant push now to do exactly both of those use cases, to provide those in the form of chatbots, because healthcare organizations have noticed, especially amongst general practitioners, that a lot of the information being requested and a lot of the information being provided is very formulaic. And if you take just the example of a healthcare checkup, so I go in and I get blood drawn, I get my A1C levels, my HDL, my LDL, so on and so forth. If I have questions regarding that, and I get my results and I have questions, I can ask a chatbot those questions for what is effectively a canned response that I would otherwise get from my doctor. Because if my HDL's here, my LDL's here, he knows what he's going to say based on the ratio of those two factors. And of course, I have to exercise more and eat less salt and all the fun stuff. But that's all very stock, very prescriptive. They anticipate that chatbots will be able to handle the majority of those types of use cases. And then the other one you pointed out with regard to the legal profession, it's very similar. Now, there is a necessary knowledge of any specific legal entity, like a given state may have different laws than another state, and you have to take that into account. But for things like marriage disputes or sort of minor crimes that you need to appeal, they can go through and actually find all of the legal documentation that you need to fill out, as well as ask you all of that information up front in order to provide you with the legal documentation already filled out to facilitate that process. They estimate that the majority of the time people don't go through that process because they can't figure it out. They don't understand, how to connect A to B to C to D, whereas the lawyers know exactly how to navigate that path. Chatbots can automate all of that very same activity. And then lastly, the first folk that I mentioned before we created that traffic ticket website is doing exactly that with other legal types of requests, workers' compensation claims, all that type of stuff.
Okay. Well, there's a question that just came in that's related to that. It says, and you've kind of answered it, but it says, can you talk to any legal compliance concerns you have come across in terms of not having a person or professional behind what might be an important life issue question going to a chatbot, and how has it been addressed, healthcare specifically? So I guess in other words, can you, a chatbot is not a lawyer, and nor is a chatbot a doctor, right? So can you really trust a chatbot? Is I think what they're asking here. Right.
And that's where I think the organizations themselves are going to have to be relatively careful. But the vendors who are developing these things will want to make sure that they've got the appropriate guardrails up, because you don't want to get into this what we call questionable territory. If things are very simple in terms of the requests and things are low risk, then that's really where you want to focus. And it's why you'll never get rid of doctors, quite frankly, right? Because their input is going to be required. But for what's probably effectively 80% of the requests that come across a doctor's desk on any given day could in fact be handled by these chatbots with low risk. And then you're also going to need a tight audit control process. So if there's ever any question, and through machine learning, you can actually put up fail-safes that say, for this response, there was a less than 60% certainty that this was going to be correct. So once you have those sorts of guardrails up, you can then ferret that request out to, or issue that request out to a doctor for follow-up. So they can actually review the logs, review the transaction, follow up directly with the patient. But again, you're freeing them up from the 80% of sort of the mundane repetitive tasks and just focusing now on the 20% of here's an issue that we might want to take a little more time and care in reviewing.
All right. How far away are we with sort of self-healing applications? So I guess, in other words, let's say that you had a virus on your PC, and it was one of those nag viruses that just came up and it just made some noise and did kind of some funny things, but you didn't really know how to get rid of it, so you can kind of get back to work. Can you submit some sort of a chatbot request, and can that chatbot go out, identify what the issue is, and then fix it. Is that a ways off, or you're still going to have to send somebody out or put a real person on the phone to kind of see what's going on, and then that person might know what to do right away? You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I'm happy to say that technology exists today. Now, the chatbot itself isn't going to figure out what that virus is, for example. However, there are a number of commercially available products on the market today that will. So what the chatbot's going to do is invoke the request to have that third-party tool fulfill the request of doing a virus scan on the target computer, returning the results back to the chatbot, so it looks like the chatbot's doing all the work, right? And then figure out where to go next. Do we reboot, re-image your machine? Can we just simply run a new virus scan to, quarantine and remove the threat? Whatever the answer is would then go back to that third-party technology to take the appropriate action. So that technology exists today, and even though it isn't the chatbot proper that's doing that remediation, it's the chatbot that's facilitating that. So it's that natural language, hey, I think I have a virus on my computer, that allows the whole process to get kicked off, as well as what to do with it when they find out that, yes, in fact, there's a problem.
Okay, and is that something that would be built into some security software? Is that where that's coming from?
Either that, okay. or like I just, for example, BMC's client management tool,
right.
That type of stuff.
Okay. Another question here is, I guess on JSON experience, how much experience do you have to have? Is that something you can pick up quickly?
Well, it's like it's not a difficult language, and it's really not even a programming language. This is a data exchange format. It's pretty straightforward. I will say that there's a little know-how required in order to understand what you're doing and making sure that you're not going to, manipulate something by accident. There is documentation on the BMC website that tells you specifically how to go through and modify that JSON so that you can invoke those triggers. And the conversation service that comes pre-supplied with the BMC chatbot already has those hooks built in. So it's pretty easy to start with that as a basis, and then make your small changes, such as I want to invoke this custom service request that we've developed as opposed to the canned service request that comes with the solution. There's a process involved, and BMC's documentation walks you through that process. So if you can read the manual and follow it along, you're going to be fine. If you start to get into some more advanced things, then you're going to want to really have a more journeyman knowledge of JSON and all the different things that are that come with it.
Okay, and last question. I guess you've talked about the BMC chatbots being compatible, obviously, with Remedy, and I assume Remedy Force is coming as well. What about other ITSM packages like ServiceNow? I mean, that would be the big hitter, I would think. Do you know anything? Is there any talk about that?
Well, so the fact is that you can have this chatbot interface with anything. And even the BMC chatbot, you can develop custom connectors. Now, BMC has a limited supply of out-of-the-box or off-the-shelf connectors that they will provide, and I do not believe ServiceNow is among them, but I would have to go check to be sure. But even if it isn't, using a RESTful API, which is a very common interface method for most of the contemporary services that are out there today, especially a ServiceNow, for example, that is based in the cloud. Custom connector development is straightforward, and it's easy to tap into those types of applications. So even if it doesn't exist today, and I'll use the case of Remedy Force, BMC, I'm sure, is working on a Remedy Force connector so that they can do the same thing with Remedy Force that they do today with BMC Remedy ITSM. In lieu of that Remedy Force connector, it would not take a substantial amount of time to develop it ourselves until BMC was to actually provide that as a core, out-of-the-box capability. So there's really, as long as you can interface with it, and you can interface using RESTful API, as I mentioned, but you can develop Java applications as well. So even if in the event that you don't have a nice RESTful API that you can interface with, there are other integration methods available.
Okay. Great. Well, I like that it includes the innovation suite as well, because you can get your money's worth then out of writing maybe some of your own applications or plugins or something like that as well.
Right.
So I like it. Okay. Well, I think we've pretty much come to the end. Lots of good questions. Thank you, Ezra. Good job. We will be doing another seminar, or another webinar, I should say, coming up on October 17th. We have one on JIRA, and on October 24th, there's a webinar on what's new with Remedy. So we hope that you can sign in then.